said that he received what he could only describe as a sort of telepathic download of ones and zeros.
In questa prima metà del 2025 siamo riusciti a condividere quasi tutto ciò che desideravamo raccontare. Peraltro quasi tutto è stato comunicato tra novembre 2024 e febbraio 2025. Rimangono solo 2 episodi importanti che vorremmo ancora realizzare. Vedremo se riusciremo a produrli entro settembre. Nel frattempo, da oggi fino alla ripresa autunnale, pubblicheremo una serie di clip inedite. Si tratta di brevi estratti, privi di commento e grafica, che non avevano trovato spazio negli episodi precedenti. Non perché fossero meno rilevanti, tutt'altro, ma perché erano brevi o non si inserivano nel filo narrativo che avevamo scelto. Queste clip, nel corso dell'ultimo anno, offrono dettagli preziosi, approfondiscono temi già trattati o introducono elementi completamente nuovi. Sono tasselli che completano il mosaico della nostra indagine. Ci prendiamo una pausa, ma restiamo connessi. In questo episodio torniamo ad approfondire uno dei filoni più affascinanti e controversi della disclosure. L'ipotesi che in alcuni casi gli UFO possano essere macchine del tempo. È un'idea potente che merita di essere compresa nella sua giusta accezione. E anche se resta aperta a molte interpretazioni, contiene certamente un nucleo di verità. Collegata a questa visione c'è un'altra teoria, meno centrale, ma comunque presente nel dibattito, l'ipotesi che alcuni di questi velivoli siano pilotati da esseri umani provenienti da un futuro lontano. Secondo questa narrazione, l'umanità, tra decine di migliaia di anni, si troverebbe a vivere su un pianeta impoverito, inquinato, con risorse scarse e una natalità vicina allo zero. In questo scenario qualcuno sarebbe riuscito a tornare indietro nel tempo per inviarci un messaggio o un avvertimento. È importante chiarire che consideriamo questa descrizione una semplificazione estrema e piuttosto mediocre. Tuttavia ha il pregio di essere immediatamente comprensibile e rappresenta una base da cui partire per riflessioni più profonde. Uno degli aspetti collegati all'idea di esseri provenienti da altre dimensioni o del futuro è quello dei download, esperienze in cui informazioni complesse vengono trasmesse direttamente alla coscienza, in modo istantaneo, come se fossero scaricate da una rete invisibile. Abbiamo già esplorato questo fenomeno nell'episodio dedicato al muratore americano, che racconta di aver ricevuto da esseri blu conoscenze avanzate di fisica e matematica. Sia lui che l'intervistatore Jesse Michael utilizzano più volte il termine download per descrivere l'esperienza.
So a construction worker with no formal schooling downloads exotic physics from a blue alien being, and that physics is now being vindicated at the highest levels of government and aerospace. Sounds about right for 2025.
What I picked up from, you came across, certain people entered your life or you came on their radar or whatever, is that when maybe you got these interesting downloads around science, you were maybe tapped by people who are kind of in and around government circles.
Right.
Would be my guess. But
that is correct. Yes.
Do you think that blue being that prompted you to get into all this crazy stuff is still helping you out?
Yeah. Yes.
What do you think that blue being is?
I'll be honest with you. I don't know. I don't know.
Have you seen it since?
It's more of a feeling rather than a visual. That experience was a very unique one, and I haven't had it since. It's more of a feeling.
Why do you think it chose you?
I think I'll be honest with you. I think there are hundreds of thousands of people across the world that people have encountered with those exact similar experiences.
Well, it's interesting. You have like Ramanujan, downloading math.
Right,
and so you have,
right.
you look at the history of the phenomenology of science itself, and it's way trippier.
In questo episodio esploreremo altri racconti recenti di download, a partire da una figura ormai familiare per molti di voi, il nostro tecnico autorevole, un follower di cui non possiamo nemmeno rivelare il lavoro, ma che è stato centrale nella realizzazione di ben 2 episodi. Il tecnico autorevole pratica il CE5 e durante uno dei suoi incontri racconta di aver ricevuto un messaggio trasmesso direttamente alla coscienza, da quelle che descrive come luci nel cielo. Aveva appena posto una domanda silenziosa ma intensa: perché non vi fate più vedere? E la risposta è arrivata in modo fulmineo, sotto forma di download interiore. Perché ci tirano giù? Un messaggio enigmatico che inizialmente non risultava del tutto comprensibile. Seguendo il suo racconto, prima è giunta una percezione emotiva profonda, quasi viscerale, e solo successivamente la mente è riuscita a tradurre quella sensazione in parole e significato. La frase per lui allude a una forza esterna, forza sistemica, che ostacola o impedisce un contatto più aperto, che trattiene loro e li spinge verso il basso, in senso non solo fisico ma anche simbolico. Oppure potete interpretarlo letteralmente. Ascoltiamo adesso un po' di dichiarazioni dei protagonisti della Disclosure su questo argomento.
And I've talked to people that have espoused that it was almost like a QR code downloaded in their brain was the communication.
And what people, or, I can say we in kind of the UFO community, we use terms like downloads to describe certain things. One aspect of a download could be like, if you're doing this kind of in person, which I would encourage people, if you're going to actually engage in something like this, it's good to have that kind of thing, because there are such things as empowerments and transmission from a teacher or from the collective group that is good for protection. I put it in quotes because people are going to hear that word and think, oh, kind of very woo woo, but this is a real kind of thing. And it gets into this realm of non-human intelligences, because once you start getting into that thing, you got to have your kind of like, I'm not trying to push the idea like, oh, you have to be afraid of non-human intelligence by any means, but you don't know what you're going to get. And you want to have a kind of strong mentality, but you also want to have your kind of protection game on, just to filter out a negative experience, right?
So it began with questions like that, where this information is purely coming from within me. And you're absolutely right. If there's no way to validate that information, it's largely hearsay. So all I can do is relay, this is what I told, and try to be objective and independent as to what that is. Now, where things get more interesting with channeling is, Dr. Nolan was curious about how the download process would work. Is that something that we can actually do and document with Gary's scientific background? I'm a liberal arts guy. I don't really have any scientific background, nor do I have a great deal of interest in it. And so to start, Gary wanted to give me a test question. And the question he gave me, and it's funny the way he phrased it, is, I'm going to ask you something I know a great deal about and you know nothing about. And he asked me to explain how an exotic vacuum object works. And so over the course of, probably 10 to 15 minutes, I was able to draw out a schematic of what an exotic vacuum object is and how it functions best we can understand. And I show this to Gary, and he turns around his computer and shows an image of a schematic that looked, very similar, convincing enough for him that there was something to this. And then from there, we started to explore and push the boundaries of, looking at more challenging problems, like problems that have not been addressed by physicists. Things like the energy storage issue in a Casimir battery. That's one of the issues we tackled. And so, to your point, those channeled messages, they're interesting. There's hundreds of years of UFO channeled messages. There's the Urantia book, whatever this, IM material, set material, etc. All that's interesting, and it's, I guess it's entertaining to read, but you can't do much with that. And so that's where, this psionic asset element comes in once again, is that this is practical psi. Not so much that channeled information, but the fact that we can get reliable downloads is proof of non-local information, at least to myself.
You can't rule out the fact that there have been encounters that humans have had that have been incredibly negative, incredibly dark. And, people have been hurt, people have been mutilated, people have been,
and that's the reason why we need the transparency. Yeah, because otherwise we can't sort it out, because there's the positive experiences. And look, I've had, very similar to Jake, absolutely beautiful, transformative experiences where your consciousness merges with the non-human intelligence. And, that's the whole thing. And I'm open to the idea even that, hey, I mean, in my heart of hearts, it felt as genuine as can be. And these entities kind of told me that we're related in some way and everything like that. But at the same time, and I had a download.
Forgive me for interrupting, but have you ever tried to ask them why the secrecy? Why not just show yourselves far more overtly?
In my communication, or whatever you want to call it, they told me at least that they wanted people to know about them.
I let slip that I had a few friends who were being downloaded to incredible ideas, going to bed, having a dream about alien beings and ideas, and then waking up with these incredible ideas in their head, just crammed with knowledge.
It's like a crystal set locking into a kind of a radio signal, and that you lock into this unitive phenomena in the universe, and it can download all kinds of information to you non-linearly, like seeing or hearing. He said in that this faculty, we're at the brink of moving into this new species. He said, and I think he said to us all, this is 1968, right? This is like May of 1968, and he says, and I think that's why so many of you young men here refuse to go fight in this war in Vietnam.
Ascolteremo adesso Nick Pope raccontare uno degli eventi più straordinari nella storia della fenomenologia UFO, l'avvistamento nella Rendlesham Forest, nel Regno Unito. Si tratta di uno dei pochissimi casi ritenuti fondamentali a livello globale, forse meno di una decina, e questo è sicuramente tra i più significativi, anche se ancora poco conosciuto in Italia. Ci teniamo a sottolinearlo, non stiamo realizzando un episodio dedicato agli avvistamenti in sé, stiamo esplorando il fenomeno dei download.
And Rendlesham Forest lies between Bent Waters and Woodbridge. This is a sketch Jim Penniston made in his notebook at the time. It's about 9 feet across, maybe 9 feet tall at its highest point. He also saw strange symbols on the side of it.
Like hieroglyphs?
Like kind of hieroglyphs. Now, one of the interesting things about Jim is one of his skill sets was Warsaw Pact aircraft recognition. He was one of these people that could look at flashcards, even of the silhouette of any Soviet or Warsaw Pact military aircraft, and he'd go, that's an SU 35 or a MiG-29 or whatever the numbers are, and whatever variants. And so when Jim was looking at this craft and those symbols, he was like, well, when I say that this is like nothing I've seen before, that's a pretty dramatic statement, because some people were saying, well, you saw strange symbols. Might they have been Cyrillic alphabet? And he was like, no. And he's like, I know what that is. I know every symbol on the side of every aircraft. And he got close enough to touch the side of this craft, which he said afterwards, he said, yeah, that was probably a pretty dumb idea. But curiosity. And he said, and this is probably the most controversial part of the story, he said that he received what he could only describe as a sort of telepathic download of ones and zeros.
Right when he touched it?
When he touched it.
Yeah.
Now, he thought nothing more about it. He then got this compulsion to write down 16 pages of ones and zeros in his notebook a few evenings later, and promptly put that aside for decades, not least because he stayed in the service. It's one thing to say that you've seen a UFO. He was kind of okay because his deputy base commander saw it too, so that's fine. But you can't say, and I then got a telepathic download from the craft, otherwise you're out. And he was in the PRP program, which was personnel reliability program thing, very high security clearance. he would have lost that in an instant if he'd started talking about this sort of thing. So he didn't say anything about it for years, but then he kind of came out with it. He's like, I don't know what to make of it. The producers of Ancient Aliens actually got the story. They found a computer engineer, computer scientist called Nick Sisk, who just, now there are websites that can do this, but at the time I'm not sure there were. But he translated it from binary, and there was a message. And the message reads, exploration of humanity, continuous for planetary advance, eyes of your eyes, origin year 8100, which is what put him on to time travel as a possibility for this. And then a list of latitudinal and longitudinal coordinates that just happen to match with the locations of a lot of sacred sites all around the world, everything from the Great Pyramids at Giza through to the Nazca lines in Peru, and a number of other sites. But origin year 8100 made him think maybe this isn't extraterrestrial, maybe it's
future human
time travelers. And then something really interesting happened. I didn't really.
It's all pretty interesting so far.
Yeah, but there wasn't really anything you could hang your hat on. And then I found out that when I was looking into this, I found out that there are very few professors doing theoretical work on time travel. But there is one called Ronald Mallett. And Ronald Mallett was saying, well, is there any way that time travel could work, but without violating any of the laws of physics? And he said, one thing that you might be able to do would be to send a message back through time. And he said the way that you would do this is that he said some subatomic particles have a spin state that is kind of either up or down. And he said if you therefore send a stream of particles back into the past, but control their spin state so that they are either up or down, if you can control that, you can create a binary message. Now, Jim didn't even know what binary code was, let alone, or had no experience of it. Didn't know that it was ones and zeros, and that's how you, and of course, none of these people had heard of Ronald Mallett. And yet here was Ronald Mallett postulating that you might send a message back in time using binary code.
E adesso entriamo nel cuore della questione. Vi presentiamo il contributo del dottor Michael Masters, professore di antropologia biologica alla Montana Technological University. Non è una figura nota al grande pubblico, ma comunque una voce presente nel panorama della disclosure, e in particolare il principale promotore della teoria secondo cui alcuni UFO sarebbero pilotati da esseri umani provenienti dal futuro. Chi siamo noi di Intermundia per decidere cosa sia giusto accettare o meno? Il nostro compito non è giudicare, ma portare alla luce le ipotesi più stimolanti, anche quando si discostano dal pensiero dominante. Vi proponiamo quindi un estratto da quella che consideriamo la migliore discussione attualmente disponibile su questo filone. Non ve la presentiamo integralmente, ma ci concentreremo sulla parte più significativa del nostro percorso, quella che riguarda i download. Per chi desiderasse approfondire, trovate il link al video originale in descrizione.
I got into this when I was 8 years old because I had what I now understand was a moment of conscious precognition where I visualized together, I talk about this at the beginning of both my books, an early human, a modern human, and this archetypal gray alien, and then the thoughts that came with that, which I feel is just now me putting that information back in past me, because I would eventually do that, and then it's this closed time-like loop of sorts. So that was kind of my motivation, and I've been driven to study physics and astronomy and then change my major to biological anthropology to study the humanoid form associated with them because I was led to do that. I remember the exact moment standing behind Morton Hall at Ohio University. There was this little voice in my head that said, maybe we should explore it this way. Maybe we're all experiencing that. You just don't notice it until you really start to reflect on the way everything's connected and start to put those pieces together, especially with regard to the synchronicities and who you meet and when you meet them.
Can you say at all when you had your future human contact experience, what was communicated to you?
Well, it's interesting you asked that specifically because it was an intervention. I didn't tell anybody this.
Yeah.
I was washing dishes at my sink. My wife's sitting on the couch. And I just thought, I'm tired. I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
I just want to get this last book done and just kind of slowly back away from all of these conversations. I was traveling a lot, conferences, TV shoots. I was exhausted.
From the UFO topic specifically.
UFO top.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't like going to go blow my brains out in a closet or something. Like,
Yeah.
I was tired of this.
I've had that experience many times.
You
man.
feel
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
taxing.
Yeah.
And I didn't tell anybody. I thought about telling my wife. I thought about being, I didn't tell her. I didn't say anything to anyone. When they approached me physically, face to face, this individual, there were two individuals present. One pulls up a chair so close that his knee goes into my crotch, and I have a very strong fight or flight response, and it was very much fight. And he looks at me in the eyes and says, I can tell you're very upset about this, but I need to be this close for this to work. And all of a sudden, happiness returns. Next thing he said is what got in my head a little. He said, actually, he's not the right pronoun, they. It's all they. That's the only pronoun they ever used, we and they. There's never a sense of ego or individualism at all. In fact, I came away with this with no sense of ego, or at least a very diminished form of it. But they said, we know you've been thinking about quitting lately, and we'd really prefer you didn't do that. And I said, how could you possibly know that? I never told anybody that. I never even spoke those words out loud. It was a thought in my head. And they said, once you know who we are, you'll know how we know that. And then telepathically, I communicated future humans. And they said, so you know how we did that? I said, uh-huh. And then the conversation went in a lot of different directions. The vast majority of it was entirely telepathic. At some point, we just stopped using vocalized speech. And even though there were two individuals, all of the voices were the same voices. And this is the thing that blows my mind the most. And I remember Terry Lovelace talking about this when he met Betty Rubble. He just heard her voice in his head in the same voice. If you're not articulating something, it's not vibrating your malleus, incus, and stapes to send the signal, why does it still sound like that individual? It's mind-blowing. But the three of us are communicating telepathically over the course of, I would guess, another 10, 15 minutes. A lot of other things are exchanged. I had questions, they had questions. But the main point of it was that they wanted, if I was okay with it, they're very polite, extremely polite. If I was okay with it, they said, we'll black your eyes out and give you 3 things that will be important at a future time.
What were that?
I don't have access to it. They told me I wouldn't have access to it. They said, we need to put this information in your brain. If you're okay with it, and by this point it was very clear who they were, their abilities, hive mind consciousness, interacting in this way. I trust them and also realized that in various ways I had been interacting with them the whole time. That little voice in my head when I changed majors, a conversation they referenced right before I went to a conference at Rice University, where I thought it was just all in my mind. They referenced that conversation that we had just prior to me going to this conference. So I agreed, and that's exactly what happened. My eyes went black. I'm still staring at the same individual. In fact, by this point, it got very difficult to turn my head. I was kind of just mesmerized. I think that's the word some use. My eyes went black, and all of a sudden, I feel all of this information coming in my brain. And the other individual standing to my left occasionally would say, did you get that? Did you get that? I'm like, uh-huh. And I can see it coming in, I have no idea what it is.
Wow.
It's in there.
Yeah.
I can't access it. I agreed to have it put
It's like
there.
you were partitioned or something.
Yeah, maybe. But what's crazy is the reaction. This was at the beginning of a conference. There's a lot going on. There's a party, Halloween party. Some of my best friends from the UFO community are there. We're going to jam tunes, play music.
Yeah.
Been wanting to play Travis Walton's guitar with Micah Hanks for all this time. And I stood up. Once they released me from this, slowly I could see this individual again, or them, in this manifested form. I turn, I get up, I walk through what's now a very crowded room of people from this balcony. A woman puts her hand on my arm and says, "Are you okay?" And I was going, like I couldn't lift my head. It felt like it was a 50-pound weight tied to my forehead. I walk out of the VIP room where this had happened on the balcony, down to my room, which is about 5 doors away.
Where is all of this?
At a conference hotel in Phoenix.
Phoenix.
Almost exactly 1 year ago.
Yeah.
Lay down on the bed, lay down backwards, feet still on the ground, and slept for 13 hours straight.
Wow.
Wake up, still with my feet on the ground, still with all my clothes on, and just started crying uncontrollably.
Wow.
Not because I was happy, sad, confused, nothing. Like whatever happened.
Did it feel cathartic? Did you feel like you were letting out
No,
pain or anything?
it was
No,
just, I just
crying.
couldn't control it.
Interesting.
I cried for hours. I had to be on a panel the next day with a bunch of people.
How was that?
Fine, because I controlled the crying. I went and got breakfast. Unfortunately, it was sat right by the cash register where all of these people gather for their Sunday brunch. And I'm just losing my goddamn mind at this point. And there's all these people coming, walking right. I was hoping to be like back in a corner or something. Didn't get that. Come back to my room, still crying. Go down to give a book to an individual who was working at the registration table. And all of a sudden, the same individual kind of materializes in this empty hallway, walks past me, put his hand on my shoulder and says, "Are you okay?" I go, "Uh-huh." That's all I could say, "Uh-huh." And all of the time this is happening is, "Uh-huh." Like I'm processing, I'm doing what I'm supposed to, I'm
Do you
getting
know
the information.
the individual's name or?
Yeah. I know both of their names, but again, these aren't. This is what I mean when we talk about reconceptualizing what it means to be human.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as who is this individual.
You think of them as almost,
I wasn't talking to that individual.
They're generic emissaries.
I
of
was
some
talking to the same
collective
they
yeah.
that knows my thoughts
Yeah.
enough to reference two very specific moments of interaction. Or one wasn't. I was just thinking, I don't want to do this anymore as I'm washing my damn dishes. They knew that thought.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about individuals, but that individual who's a part of this reappeared as I'm walking through this hallway, takes that residual, whatever it was. Again, it wasn't negative. I wasn't scared by this. I wasn't upset by it. I just couldn't stop crying, but I needed to because I was on an important panel about 2 or 3 hours later.
Yeah.
So it was an effort to sort of quell the ontological shock. If there was a part of that, it's hard to say there wasn't, but also just whatever was happening, whatever reaction my brain had to being force-fed information in this way in a very short period of time in a little primitive monkey brain that couldn't handle it.
So then you think they're walking among us?
They absolutely are, yeah.
Wow.